As mentioned in the part 1 of chapter 29 here on the 1950s, there was this economic prosperity that existed. Part of the boom of the economy was contributed to the rapid growth of the construction boom and the growth of the suburbs. But another big part of that is also dealing with the increased amount of cars that were being produced. As families had moved out to the suburbs, they needed vehicles to be able to get them to their jobs and stores and to whatever else they needed to get to. So a lot of families were buying that second car. In fact, in 1955, there were 8 million cars sold, which helped fuel that economy. Because as you produce and sell more cars, you also spur on the need for other industries as well. For example, you need service stations to fix the cars, gas stations. Eventually, as families are traveling more, you need hotels and motels. Other businesses that kind of boomed because of it would be obviously drive-in movie theaters, restaurants, including fast food restaurants like McDonald's. And so by this increased amount of cars being driven, it spurred on many other industries creating that economic prosperity. Also back in 1955, we can look back and be a little jealous, I guess, that gas back then was only about 30 cents per gallon. And they're talking pretty soon here in the summer of 2012, gas getting maybe between $4 and $5 per gallon. It's a long ways from 30 cents per gallon. And not only did cars have an economic benefit to society, but every 15-year-old knows that as they're getting ready to turn 16 and grab those keys for the first time, the sense of freedom and opportunity to kind of go out and start to be yourself and kind of fend for yourself and kind of come of age. It's almost a rite of passage that every teenage boy and girl looks forward to. With more cars being sold, we also needed better ways to be able to get around. And in 1956, President Eisenhower signs into effect the Interstate Highway Act. This act is what created our interstate highway system that we have today. However, back then, it was passed at a cost of $32 billion, becoming the single largest project our federal government ever kind of partook in. And it took about 20 years to build and included over 40,000 miles of interstate highways. Now, the one question I have is, how can a state like Alaska, maybe Hawaii, and even if we look Puerto Rico, have interstate or between state highways? And you just don't quite understand that one. Now, even with the conformity that was talked about in part 1, there were challenges to that conformity during this time as well. And it kind of came from those that were called beatniks, people who kind of marched to the beat of their own drum. These would be people that maybe dressed a little different, grew their hair out, had facial hair, grew out their beards. But those who maybe were taken back a little bit by the materialistic pursuit of happiness, the trying to fit in and be like everybody else. Now, one of the most famous beatniks of the time was Jack Kerouac, author of On the Road. And the book really kind of surprised many of the kind of more conservative people in the United States for its use of vulgar language and illicit drug use, which would have been more prevalent amongst the beatniks. And so there's kind of that conservative backlash against the beatniks themselves. Now, in a different way, we have other challenges to conformity as well. Betty Friedan challenged it in a way that she fought for feminism, not standing, pat on the status quo of, men, being superior to women. But in her book, Feminine Mystique, she puts forth and writes about, kind of the women's movement, which really she's kind of looked at as the mother of the feminist movement that kind of really kicks in the 1960s. And in a different way itself also, you see the king himself, Elvis Presley, kind of challenging the conformity, bringing in a new style of music, rock and roll, which people kind of looked at as the devil's music. It kind of was a little bit too much of a mix of kind of white and black music, and even the way that he danced was kind of taboo, and certain stations even banned him from being filmed from the waist down when he was on their TV shows because they thought his hips might be too suggestive and corrupt the minds of the young women that might be watching. So whether it was the music or the dance at the time, kind of pushed the boundaries a little bit for the 1950s as well. Now turning our attention to kind of science and maybe a little international flavor here. In 1957, the Russians successfully launched Sputnik. It's the first satellite to ever orbit the Earth, and it traveled around the world at an astonishing 18,000 miles per hour, circling the globe every about hour and a half. And this really kind of scared the Americans, because if the Russians could get a satellite up there, we had to ask ourselves, could they get possibly missiles up there? And being that this was kind of right in the middle of the Cold War, it really put a fear into the United States. And so much so that Congress creates NASA, or National Aeronautics and Space Administration, in 1958. And they appropriate vast sums of money to try to help get us caught up to the Soviets when it comes to space. They also promoted math and sciences in high school and in colleges, and encouraged students to go to college and pursue those areas for careers to try to get us caught back up, which over time we do, and even surpass them by 1969, getting the first man on the moon, which JFK had made a goal, and we saw that it came true. If we change gears one more time here and kind of look at politics a little bit in the presidential administrations, we just take a quick little look at Harry Truman and what becomes known as his fair deal. He attempted to capitalize on his 1948 upset victory over Thomas Dewey to try to piggyback off of FDR's New Deal programs and try to get his Fair Deal programs passed. Now, he never was successful at enacting any of his legislation. He kind of ran up against a conservative coalition of Republicans and Democrats in Congress that kind of thought he was biting off more than he could chew, and didn't pass his legislation that he wanted. But what he was hoping for was national medical insurance, increase in education, fair employment standards, to name a few. But again, these were things that didn't get passed, but maybe kind of laid the groundwork for future legislative measures. A couple of things that did get passed during his administration was that minimum wage was increased to 75 cents, right? A whole 75 cents for minimum wage. And he also expanded Social Security. Today, if I'm not mistaken, minimum wage is sitting right around something like $7.25. So again, we've kind of come a long ways. After mentioning just a little bit about Truman, I also have to kind of mention a little bit here about Dwight Eisenhower, the Republican president, that when he had been elected, he kind of took on an idea of what was called modern republicanism. And what he meant by that was he was a fiscal conservative, Right, so you want to be careful, not spend much money, conservative on money, but he wanted to be liberal on people. And so he kind of wanted to shrink the spending of government, which included, shrinking the defense budget, and kind of balance the budget, and kind of, not spend as much. And yet at the same time, he wanted to kind of help take care of the people still. And by that, his almost biggest accomplishment was that he didn't dismantle the New Deal programs of the Democrat era with FDR. Even though he was a Republican, he kind of left those safety nets and social programs intact.